So there are some things that we would want to cover here for this session. I just want to talk about how we can loop through a body of code. Okay, so that's the main goal for this session. We want to talk about JavaScript loops. And this is going to be very useful, especially if we want to run the same code over and over again. So that we can go through those line of codes. And this is especially useful if we are going to be using an array. So some things to take note of, when it comes to loops, we want a block of code to run a number of times until a condition is met. Sometimes that's the use cases. We have a number of different iteration statements, and we also want some of them will be for loops, for in, or loop for, loop for in, loop for off, loop while. Let me just press an Alt Z there so that we can wrap the text that we have here. And again, as I mentioned, some of the things that we would want to be able to cover will be relationships of loops to arrays. So in this session, that's one of the things that we would want to accomplish. I was actually exploring. I've been a bit busy with. I was actually exploring. I was actually a bit busy with game development so far, and some work. So it's been quite some time since I did some JavaScript review. So let's try to see here. For the first loop that we want to cover, we want to have the for loop. And some things to take note of here will be the for loop will have 3 optional expressions. Okay, so we have expression 1, expression 2, and expression 3. And if we try to create a simple example for this, so we have the for keyword. Inside of that, we would want to have the let keyword. Let's just first type them here. Variable initialization with the let I. We're checking for a condition. We're doing some increment here. And then let's console.log I. So we do have 3 expressions here. Expression 1 is going to be executed one time before the execution of the code block. So we know that we have a value of 10. We're saying here, if we try to read this expression, if you remember, we have a way to define an expression by adding two values, getting a declaring a variable, assigning a value, checking out a condition. So those are expressions, right? So these are three different expressions in JavaScript. Here is we're trying to increment the value, and what are we going to get here? We know that this is going to be, we're assigning the value of 0, and if we try to node, we should be able to get some things outputted, or we will be having some items displayed on our terminal here. So this one is going to be executed once before the execution of this code block. Then here we'll be defining the condition for the executing condition block, or executing the code block. So if I is less than 10, so we continuously execute whatever is inside of the line 23 here as an instruction. And every time after the code block has been executed, we execute this expression. So that means we'll be adding 1, right? Let's start to see what will happen here. So we can see what happened there. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Because I is less than 10, or 9 is less than 10, we stop executing and we stop incrementing the value already. So here we're setting the variable. So if we try to break this down, expression 1 sets a variable. In this case, we assigned a value to a variable or I think a much better sentence for this is declare a variable I and assign it with a value of 0, right? Then here we define the condition for the loop to run. So if we write this in English, we're saying if I is less than 10, then execute the code block. Instruction console.log I. And in here we have that third expression here. We wanted to increment or increase the value each time the code block in the loop is true or the condition in the loop has been met, right? So we're just translating whatever expression or whatever line of code that we have in the for loop here into each of this expression into English. So that's so we can see that once we have already met the condition here of is less than 10, what if we say less than or equal to 10? You would see we get to reach up to that value of 10. Okay, so that's where the condition comes in. So we do have a shorthand version for this. I'm sure there's a we can actually just try to check out. Shorthand version. Will this still execute the same way? That didn't seem to work. So I think we really have to think we can also use shorthand for this. Let's see. Let me just check. I think we don't have to put the let keyword. There we go. So this is just the shorthand. But I think we cannot have it just like that. Okay, so you will see I is not defined. We have to make sure that we define it, or else we'll run into some sort of a reference error. So this is the shorthand version. Shorthand version for a for loop for the first expression. But we have to give it a value of 0. And we do get the same results. Let's have some. I want to also test this out in here. Iteration statements. For loop. And in here, let's have an h2 JavaScript for loop. Let's give it a value of paragraph PID for loop. Let's just then inside of this, let's have a script tag. Let's declare a variable, let's say fruits. Let's have an array of banana, apple, and orange. Let's see. Before we proceed with the, I think before we go and proceed with arrays, I just want to first have words, or let's say text. Let's give it a, let's assign it with an empty value. And let's have a for loop. You'd see if I type for, you have for each, for in, for off, right? And if we try to go for this, it provides us with the let index, another index, array.length, index plus plus, const element array, and then the index passing in the array literal that we have here. However, in this case, I don't want that. I just want to have that text. Then let's a concatenation here, I plus line break. I'm not going to use this. Let's have 5. What will be displayed? Now run this on the browser. You'll have to have a document that get element by ID for loop that inner HTML property, and we give it a value of. So what will be displayed? That doesn't seem to be working. Let index send the value of 0. Index is less than 5. Then we want to increment that. And that's because we have to make sure that that's index. So you would see I is just like the index for the first expression. And there we go. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is now getting displayed in our browser. So in this example, we set the variable index 0. Then we're checking it must be less than 5. Then we're increasing that to 1. That's why our number is plus the index starting from 0. What was on the browser again? So we started on 0, 1, 2, 3, less than 5, up to 4. Each time the code block is executed, because this condition was met, we execute this line of text. From where we are incrementing the index here, that's why we're getting that number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're just adding a line break in here for us to be able to move to the next line. Because if we don't add this, if we try to go back here, you would see we will be on an inline where we're not getting any line breaks. Let's go back here. I just wanted to show that. So now let's try to iterate through an array. Let's go back here now. Just actually committing my changes here. Now let's have another example. Let A assign the value of, let's say, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. I is equals to 0, which is a shorthand. I is less than array dot length and then let's increment it. Then console.log. Then we'll use the array to access array accessory operator, which is the square bracket here, to get that index value of 0. Let's end the statement with this. See what will happen here. What are we going to get? We're getting, I think we have to. That should be array. So reading through the error, we have a reference error. A is not defined. That's because this array should be this array. If I call that A to shorthand, because we want to access the elements of an array in this array literal that contains integers, right? And that is happening again because we have to also change this. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So we're able to console log starting from 10. And again, Control H. Let's replace that with array. That should still work. We're still getting 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So that's how arrays can be, how this for loop can be very useful, especially if we want to loop through each elements of the array. You will see we are able to display those values. Sorry. We also know that expression 1 can be optional. So let's try to test something here. Let's first set up another example before we move forward here. Let me just let's go try to have some let's see. Before we have some more examples here, let's try to first, using the HTML or the browser, let's first try to have another, let's just see the syntax for a for each. Let's see for in. This is the for loop. IntelliSense here is pretty useful for us. For loop. It provides us the different possible syntax. What is this? For in. Okay. So I think we can try. It's actually raining today here in our place. And how does the for of look like? Okay, so those are just some templates that IntelliSense is providing us. And just take note, I is definitely not going to be required. You can actually call this Control F, Control H. Just replace all of those index with B. This will still be working. I don't want to use this. So I is actually just the common way for defining the index. So 20, for example, console.log p. I think we'll have to, where's the, don't need an array here. What are we going to get if we try to do this? You would see we're getting that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 0 to 19. Even though we did use the word or character B instead of an I. Thank you, Silverjack. I was actually a little bit preoccupied with what I was doing. I wasn't able to see your chat. So let me just go back to what we're discussing here right now. Another iteration statement that I just want to actually explore here will be the while loop. So let's try to look for let's have an example for the while loop. And let's try to also talk about the difference between the for loop and the while loop. Let x, let's declare a variable with a value of 1. And let's say we have a while keyword here. And let's have 10. So let's see. Let's go and try to add console.log x and increment. So we have declared the variable x, and we're checking based from what we know already from our for loop. We have here the declaration of x. We are assigning it a value of 1. Then we're checking for if it's less than 10. So how will that be running if we try to run this now? And then we do see that it produces the same value. In this case, we're starting from 1. That's why you can see here that we got the 1 to 9, right? Until, so it's like we're saying here, we assign the value, or we have an expression declaring a variable, assigning it a value of 1, and we're checking until this condition is met. While this is true, continuously increment the value of 1. That's why 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 is less than 10, and that's the time the condition goes to false. That's why we end the while loop. So we can see that this has more structure. We have more expressions inside of the for loop. The while loop, on the other hand, uses some sort of a function declaration of method while. By passing in the condition, we have a code block. So here inside of the code block, we can control whatever is inside here based on the condition that we have set here. So most of the time, this is going to be much more flexible when we are building business logic, depending on how many times we will be iterating in the body of the while statement. And here we are limited by the number of times we want to run, this being the number of times we set in the top section here, right? Outside of the body of the for loop. So we can also try to do something different here. Let's say if I go down here, let's let x, we can also set here, I think we can just copy this. Then let's say here we would want to have console.log x plus plus, which will be incrementing the value of 1, and if x is equals to 7, we can use a break statement. So what will happen here? We're circumventing the check in our condition. So that means if we try to test this out, we would see if it reaches 7, then stop whatever code we're running here. So you would see we were able to stop it on line 7 here. X is equal to 7. We ended the while loop because we set another condition inside of the code block. So there are some things to take note also when you're using the while loop. We would want to prevent encountering the what we call the, if I remember it correctly, let me just recall. We don't want to have a continuous loop. Is that called continuous loop? I'm having a mental block today. I just want to show you first another syntax here, because we can actually break down our if statement and just say 7 break. Let's see if this will also do that exact same output. We do get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So we just remove the curly brackets, and this is a shorthand one line condition inside of the while loop that we have here. Infinite loop, that's the term that I was trying to think about. So we don't want to have an infinite loop. Okay, so I think that's it for the iteration loop for this session. Thank you for our time for this evening session.